This video is about render DOM. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly what render DOM is, how I ended up creating it, and the background leading up to that. And if you are in the same position as me, where you depended on RDOM in production and you no longer can, how render DOM can help you. So to begin with, I'll explain how I got to where I ended up creating render DOM. So back in 2015, at my old company, we started using React in production. We started learning about React because it was a hot new framework. It was supported by Facebook. And before that, we were using Angular. It seemed nice and also was a lot faster than Angular in a lot of the tests we were running. We decided to make the jump from Angular to React. The main problem we had with React was basically JSX. So a lot of us didn't like JSX because it wasn't HTML, it wasn't JavaScript. It was this weird cross between the two. It made the learning curve for React steeper, and it seemed kind of unnecessary. At the time, we had fans of Haskell and the functional programming kind of ideology, and it seemed like JSX could easily be replaced with functions. And we started looking for alternatives to JSX. So the first thing we came across was HyperScript. We took a look at it. There are a couple of knocks to HyperScript whenever we were evaluating all of our options. The first knock was compared to some of the alternatives such as RDOM, the API didn't seem as nice. So for example, having to type this H opening parentheses, quote, div, end quote, was a little bit more verbose than some of the alternatives such as RDOM. And whenever you were going to be typing a lot of lines of code, we are going to be using this every single day. It seemed like the API could be shortened in a way similar to what RDOM did. The second thing was that HyperScript was not backed by a big company. Before this, most of the major packages we were using were backed by big companies. So, for example, we were using Angular and it was backed by Google. Switched to Facebook, it was used by React. And if they weren't backed by big companies, a lot of times we knew how they were being funded. So that made us feel better about using the code in production. But we weren't very sure about HyperScript, how long it would be around, how long it would be maintained, and that kind of stuff. So then comparing that to RDOM, RDOM was created by Uber, the same Uber that you use to call a ride, the same Uber as Uber Eats. So it was backed by a big company. The API was a lot nicer. As you can see, you just do r.div, r.h1, r. And then whatever tag you're trying to use, HTML tag. And then if you're using your own custom component, then it's just r opening parentheses in the component. So we liked the API a lot, and we liked the fact that it was backed by Uber. We had a good feeling that it would be around for a while since Uber was using it and they created it. So we started using RDOM, and eventually we actually rolled it out to production. I think RDOM was used in about 3 or 4 different projects in production on the front end, and everything was good until eventually we noticed that Uber wasn't really updating RDOM, which was fine because it was stable for the most part. We just kind of kept chugging along and using it as it was. And eventually, in February of 2021, Uber archived the RDOM repository, which was kind of like the signal that we needed to check our options and find something else. So from where we stood, there were 3 options. Option number 1 was do nothing, just hope that the RDOM dependencies and its support were good going forward, which we knew it wasn't going to be supported, but we could just hope that it wouldn't break, basically, and be good in its current form. That wasn't really an option because we just didn't want to be sitting ducks. We wanted a plan moving forward. If something were to happen, how we'd be able to adjust. So from there, we could refactor all of our code from RDOM to using something like HyperScript or even JSX. That was considered for a while, but it was going to be a lot of work to refactor all of our different projects. So then eventually we went with option number 3, which was creating a drop-in replacement for RDOM. And that is how I got to render DOM. The render DOM, as I said, is a drop-in replacement. So normally your import would be like import R from RDOM. If you want to switch to render DOM, you just add this ENDER, and now you're importing from render DOM instead of RDOM. You can do a find and replace for RDOM and just switch it out to render DOM, and everything should work. That's essentially how I created the API to work. I wanted it to be exactly how the RDOM API was. Since then, I've added a few additional features. So some of the newer HTML tags, I've added support for them. But pretty much other than that, everything else should be exactly the same. So this is ready to go. If anyone is in the same position that I was in, where you were counting on RDOM to be around for a while, you used it in production, you have a bunch of code written using RDOM, and you don't want to have to completely refactor all of your code, then this is a good option. That's kind of where we're at. That's how I got to creating it render DOM, the history of using RDOM, and it no longer being supported, and how you can switch to render DOM if you're in the same position.